Hello and welcome to Cybersalon. I'm Eva Pasco and I will be the host for today's discussions. This is the first episode of our series on sci-fi stories on big tech and near futures. I'll be co-hosting the series with Stephen Auram and Ben Greenaway. Today we have 4 stories in the grand finale of our open call on the future of smart health. Our selected writers will present the stories and we will have a discussion about sci-fi role in reclaiming and regaining control of our medical data.
A monitoring system like the one in Brita's story is tracking markers which are indexed on a sort of average behavior, the idealized and fictitious standard daily routine of a person of a certain age and class and a certain socio-demographic group. And the story really highlights how intrusive and inadequate the monitoring systems can become when the person which is monitored lives a life that doesn't align with the expected average standard behavior, and how this can lead to a total absence of privacy and can also upset a lot parent-children relationships, for example.
Today is our first event in the new series called Tales from the Cybersalon, which is near future sci-fi tales experience. So this is a new format for us. Today is the first of 4. And we are extremely lucky to have a number of experts, writers, and people who we can discuss the concept of future health. The last year has really managed to disrupt everything from health, our lives, cities, families, work, and obviously killed hundreds of thousands of people. And health just became the priority, the most important thing on everyone's agenda, because we cannot ignore it anymore. So we thought it would be interesting to bring together writers, experts on the topic, and exchange ideas and see, maybe reimagine if more health tech is really what we need, and if more health tech surveillance is more what we need. So today we're in a very capable hands of 2 leads for the night. So Stephen Auram, he is the editor of the series and a sci-fi writer, and he will be joined by Ben Greenaway, who is leading from Cybersalon, and will be contributing both as a coordinator and as a writer. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Yes, hello and welcome to the first of the Tales from the Cybersalon series on the new normal for health. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce the panel that you see below you, and also to describe the process that's been behind the scenes to get us here. In part, that's because, picking these stories, writing these stories, they're newly commissioned stories for this event, for this subject matter. And as much as we have some great writers who are Stephen and Britta and Joel, and for now myself as well, to kick the series off, it's the subject matter and how we engage with the content, what we decide is worth talking about, how we want to sort of stretch these ideas that we bring our experts panel in for. And the experts panel and the writers panel have already met. So we've all met. We met online. We had a Zoom call about a month back now, the beginning of March, when we went through the first draft of stories, if you like, from the writers group. And that in itself had been based on some of the background materials and research interests of our panel. So I think with that in mind, it's worth introducing the panel and letting you see why we thought their backgrounds and their fields of interest would be a good sort of jumping off point for this set of stories. So first, I'd like to introduce Christine Accardi. And Christine is King's College Informatics and a senior research fellow at the Human Brain Project and the Foresight Laboratory. So Christine.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be part of this panel tonight. friends and good names and things. It's really great. So yeah, like Ben said, my name is Christine. I'm a senior research fellow affiliated with the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at King's College London. I am also providing training in the methods and practice of responsible research and innovation in 2 centers for doctoral training coordinated by King's. So the Center for Doctoral Training in Safe and Trusted Artificial Intelligence in the Department of Informatics, and the Center for Doctoral Training in Smart Medical Imaging in the School of Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Sciences. My personal research sits across social studies of science and technology, contemporary history of science and technology, and future studies. And through this very interdisciplinary mix, I try to get a grip on societal visions for future and emerging technology and their social and ethical import. And I focus mostly on neuro-related technologies, so artificial intelligence, robotics, brain-inspired computing, neuroinformatics, computational neuroscience mostly. For more than 6 years, until March 2020, so that's now a year ago, I was a full-time researcher in the Ethics and Society group of the Human Brain Project, which is a future and emerging technology flagship of the European Commission. And this Ethics and Society group was tasked with developing methods for responsible research and innovation to deploy across the Human Brain Project and beyond. And the small team I was part of was more particularly in charge of conducting foresight studies, so anticipating potential societal and ethical implications of the research conducted in the Human Brain Project, and of bringing all this back, all our findings back to the attention of scientists and engineers in the project and elsewhere, so as to trigger collective reflection and discussion. And it was while I was doing this work that I became interested in science fiction, and especially near future fiction, as a medium for facilitating foresight and researcher awareness work, and that I started to collaborate and develop projects with science fiction writers.
So the bridging then between the idea that we, our science fiction stories as a means to investigate research and to hypothesize about how a technology might be deployed and how it may be or may not be useful or otherwise. So also our panel for tonight is Professor Lucy Hubermann. Lucy is the Director of Digital Media Innovation at WMG as part of the University of Warwick. Hi, Lucy.
Hello, thanks for the introduction, and thank you, everybody. I come from a very different background from Christine. I come from the creative industries, so I was originally a filmmaker, executive producer, and I used to commission factual programs, but I gave that up when the BBC noticed the internet was coming, and I went into a digital lab and started looking about, I don't know, about 14 or 15 years ago, about what was coming our way and how the BBC would need to change in terms of its content, its ideas, its tech, and maybe even its remit. So I also did a lot of horizon scanning and scenario planning, but not in the same way quite as Christine, but I've always been interested in innovation. And since I went to Warwick, which was about 12 years ago, I've become absolutely fascinated in the sort of the future of patient data. Where's our data going? How many people want to use it? Will we be able to track it ourselves? Will we be able to monetize it? But also how we can design better services with it if we give our permission so to do. More recently, my research has looked at the intersection of virtual reality for the treatment of trauma and PTSD, and I'm looking to apply that in a sort of post-pandemic situation.
Also on our panel, I'd like to introduce Angus Fraser. Angus should be relatively familiar to some attendees of Cybersalon events in the past. Angus is an entrepreneur and an AI developer. He's been working recently in avionics and maritime drone rescue, but also I think you may have seen a piece that he put together for us on a mask wearing, very COVID-based AI robot piece from a few months back, as well as in fact, I think that was founding a company for the visual monitoring face mask alert tool. Is that right, Angus?
Amongst other things. So previously, when we were discussing people's faces, who owns your face? And similarly, the question now comes with medical data. Who owns your medical data? Who has a right to see your medical data? And how much control do you as an individual have over that medical data? These are all things that concern me. And frankly, I think should concern everybody. And there are some important decisions to be made as we move forward in this realm, specifically around medicine.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Angus. How we navigate these series of speeding changes, then, that might be, I think, the guiding principle of the Tales from the Cybersalon series. This is, as I said, the first in a series. There will be 4 events throughout the year of the similar format where we pair together a Cybersalon expert panel and a selection of writers in a writers panel. Right. Well, one other introduction I should make is to my co-host, Stephen Auram. Stephen actually brought the challenge to Cybersalon a couple of months ago, saying, what can we do with sci-fi? And the event series that you see in front of you now is kind of where we came to in that idea. So, Stephen, over to you to introduce our authors and our stories.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. So we've got some great stories this evening. So one of the things I'd encourage people to do, because this is not like reading stories where you can stop, pause, think, go back a few words, and then carry on. So it's really important that you sort of pay attention. I shall introduce our first story and our first reader. So Britta, who writes about technologies in elderly care. During the day, she's a research assistant at the Bauhaus University, Weimar. Have I pronounced that right, Britta? Yeah, excellent. But at night, as the Britta you see in front of you, the stories have been published in their PhD thesis, Homes for Life, as well as in various lines. And Britta's story this evening is called Meals on Wheels. So over to you, Britta.
I'm so sorry. I just very quickly. So really awkward. Hi. Hello. Oh, hi. Yeah. It's so good to hear from you. How's that husband of yours doing? Oh, really? Oh, that's great. Yeah, he deserved that. Yeah, we are doing okay here as well. Thank you for asking. Sure. I have time to chat. You might want to grab a drink though. I've already opened the bottle. No, nothing too bad. Just my mother is driving me bonkers again. You know the story. Haven't I told you yet that she has to wear one of these smart bracelets now? What? Yeah. Since she had that fall. God, have we not spoken for so long? Okay, let me start at the beginning. Mother had a fall a couple of months ago. Not too bad, but she had to have a little operation on her hip. It was a rather small thing. She just stayed at the hospital for a night, and then she was done with it. But you know Claire, she normally is the center of attention everywhere she goes, dancing, chatting, helping others. But in hospital, she was really quiet, not herself at all. And so her doctor got really worried how that might affect her in the long run. So he prescribed her one of these smart bracelets, the ones that measure, well, everything really. The armband measures her heart rate and stuff, and there's a couple of sensors in the house that connect to the bracelet. Anything out of the ordinary will trigger notification, and yeah, if there's a problem or just something changes in her behavior, the emergency contact will be alerted. And well, I am my mother's emergency contact. I wasn't too sure how I felt about that, but there wasn't really someone else. You know, I love her to bits, but we had so many fights and quarrels in the past. We have a bit of a problem setting our boundaries. I was afraid that this might make it worse, and yeah, sometimes it does. No, it's not at all like these emergency buttons. Can you imagine Claire wearing one of these ugly things around her neck? No, it's actually quite stylish. You can change the color of wristband, and she's absolutely into color matching, so she has 4 or 5 now. Well, yeah, of course she picked our senses too. And the idea is that you do not have to push a button, that it actually detects emergencies on its own, maybe even notifies you before it comes to that. It sounds like such a good idea, but whoever designed it has clearly never met my mother. Which she does. Nothing out of the ordinary. But for her standards, not mine. I get about daily notifications as the system tries to figure out. I told you she has a problem with her hips, right? But she has discovered Tinder a while ago, and now she uses it like other people use Meals on Wheels. She cannot go out much, but she gets a lot of visitors, and, well, not all come for tea and biscuits, so I get a lot of notifications that she's in and out of bed at unusual times. Maybe you want to check on her? And so, for the first times I tried to get in touch with her, which normally meant that she got quite angry with me or tried to ignore me, which I get now. I mean, you're just getting in the mood, and then the fucking phone rings. Nobody likes that. But when she called back, she would tell me all about her newest conquest, and so now I know. Too much. John let me have started to call the ringtone of the application to Get Lucky, because I can tell you quite often when my mother is going. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm really happy for her, that she's living her life to the fullest, but maybe I don't need to know all that. Yeah, I know. But there's some other things I just don't like. I mean, it wants to prevent illnesses and someone being in trouble. But I also get a couple of notifications that apparently she's day drinking and whether I want to check on her. And honestly, I assume she's just having a good time with someone who brought a bottle over. And even if not, she's a grown-up. I mean, what am I to do with the information? I hope she was telling me if she was feeling down. And if not, that is kind of her business too, right? But yeah, so I get a lot of notifications that I cannot really switch off in case something really bad happens. She cannot switch it off because it links her health insurance, and now she loses benefits when she switches it off. Her premiums have gone down because the device interprets a lot of her activity as exercise. Yeah, I know, it's quite cool that she's always been so open about her sexuality and all. So it's not like this is news to me. It's just the level of information that I get from these sensors is quite stunning. And today it just went over the top. Today I found a new feature on the device. When the mics detect something they cannot interpret, they send a snippet to you for you to decide if you want to intervene. AI is not there all the way yet, is it? And so today I had the pleasure of listening to a guy spanking my mother. Or my mother spanking a guy. They were both equally excited, so it was hard to tell from the sound alone. And you know what? I get it. I get what the thing wants to do, but how is it to know what I might want to know and what is really none of my business? Yeah, that's quite tough, isn't it? But anyways, maybe enough of my mother's sex life. I assume you know now more than you wanted. What is new with you?
Excellent, thank you very much. Shame that you had a phone call instead of your story, but it was equally as interesting. Ben, I think you're
right. Yeah. So I'm going to turn to Christine here, who we might do this as we go through each of the stories. To try and pull out a few things from that story, or really just put a pin in a couple of things that was in that story, so that when we get to the panel, you can sort of remember what's going on. So, Christine.
Yes, well, there are a lot of things I could have pulled out from this story, but what I wanted to pin out of this story for further discussion, because it really sort of poked me when I first heard it. A monitoring system like the one in Brita's story is tracking markers which are indexed on a sort of average behavior, the idealized and fictitious standard daily routine of a person of a certain age and class and a certain socio-demographic group. And the story really highlights how intrusive and inadequate the monitoring systems can become when the person which is monitored lives a life that doesn't align with the expected average standard behavior, and how this can lead to a total absence of privacy and can also upset a lot parent-children relationships, for example. So that was my pin on this story.
Thank you. That's great.
Excellent. So need to hang on to that, everybody, for later. Our next reader is Ben, who obviously is familiar to a lot of people, but just in case you don't know, he writes software for e-commerce and web startups, and he writes short stories, which he's done for tonight. And Ben's story is called Health Miles. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Connor had always said it started with the joke down the pub. National Health Service, more like National Sickness Service. Am I right? An easy shot, really. Not everybody was a fan of the NHS, not anymore. Connor, just like everyone, had given 3 years of his liberty to saving it. Again. Then, in swoops, a pharma logistics conglomerate with a long history of international labour rights convictions to save the day. That's fine, just fine, Connor thought. The pandemics keep coming. We're still paying the bill for the last 3. Maybe it's somebody else's turn to pay the bill. The program was simple. Earn rewards for healthier decisions day by day. Simple things like drinking less alcohol, eating less fast food, and taking exercise. And thousands signed up in the first few hours. It appealed to Connor that he'd win twice over if he tried it. He certainly wasn't in his 20s anymore. Some shortness of breath here, an intermittent muscle ache there, and too tight a squeeze into old jeans than he was willing to admit to. It'd be good to get a little fitter. Indeed, he thought it would be good for everyone. And a few extra treats here and there might be nice too. Hello, welcome to Implant Tech. Are you here to find out about the program? I am, Connor replied. He granted a share of basic contact information and the avatar connected. We have a wide range of rewards for your health improvements, it continued. All courtesy of our network of sponsoring partners. Eligibility for Tier 1 begins with any qualifying evidence-gathering device. Do you currently own a program-compatible device, Connor? I think so, Connor replied. The program came in 2 tiers, based on the level and granularity of data you allowed it to gather. It worked by assigning improvement points to regularly updated activity reports. For example, if you attempted to improve with some morning calisthenics, a light to moderate daily exercise routine might earn you credits for trips on public transport. Something more ambitious, like a 5-kilometer run, might earn a week's upgraded media streaming or preferential seating at a cinema or theatre. Tier 1 support is available for any 6G-enabled personal health monitor, exercise tracker, or location-enabled communications device. Some 5G devices are supported, but may require secondary evidence validation via the Drone Surveillance Archive or your residential community security feed. RCS, yeah, that'd be nice, Connor quipped. But my communications device is 6G, that's enough. How about Tier 2? Improvement points in Tier 2 were a more targeted personal calculation and, consequently, required more detail and verification. In Tier 2, you earned a proportion of your predicted healthcare outcome costs, assuming you'd not been improving them within the program. Even though it was far from a one-to-one exchange, the rewards you could earn in Tier 2 were significant. Aha, warmed the sales bot. Implantech's Tier 2 evidence gathering and validation is second to none. We are sole manufacturers of the first fully automated monitoring and reporting solution authorized to submit claims under the Tier 2 Advanced Insight Improvement requirements. Can I tell you about Capsule? The Capsule device was no larger than a multivitamin, yet it would live in its host digestive tract for a full month reporting a wide range spectrum biometrics, accelerometer and locational data back to the program twice a day. I've heard about that, Connor sighed, genuinely disappointed. As a rule, I'll never use first generation devices of any platform. It feels that should count twice if it's something inside of me. Are there any other ways to qualify for tier 2? He asked, already fairly sure of the sales bot's response. Improvement claims for tier 2 can be made on your behalf by a variety of healthcare providers, Connor. What is the name of yours? Yeah, I thought so. Sorry, but I'll have to pass. Connor disconnected the feed and slouched dejectedly into his chair. Health miles, he sighed, as if anyone can still afford to fly. The second generation unit was slightly smaller and came in a range of shaded pastel colors. Responding to Implantech's glitzy announcement alert, Connor scheduled the in-person appointment at his local pharma hub. When his time came, he selected a salmon blush Gen 2 capsule, precisely the color he imagined his lower intestine to be, washed it down with a glass of chilled almond milk, and headed home to await the calibrating diagnostics. It identified him as borderline type 2 diabetic and had detected precancerous cells in his colon. Oh Christ, Connor claimed, I'm going to be so rich. The diet and exercise program laid out before him appeared relentless, but the improvement score it was correlated against was everything he dreamed it would be, and more. He set to work right away. 3 months in, and Connor hadn't felt so good in years. 6 months in, and his pre-diabetic indicators were nearly normal again. The new habits he'd been forming in the program felt so great, they inspired him to improve still further. He was completing his 11th month and feeling fitter than ever when they announced the award. A major wave of new partners would be joining the program, and a special live stream event with a lottery of high improvement participants would be held to celebrate. The winner would have their pick from the Supreme Rewards tier for free. I wonder if I'm in with a chance of that, thought Connor, as a notification announcing his place on the shortlist appeared on his screen. The show began with the 12 lottery finalists each being interviewed in turn. And last but not least, he's beaten diabetes, he's beaten cancer, he's the most improved man in the nation's north and east. Let's welcome Connor. Hello there, Jolene. How are you? Not as healthy as you, Connor. How could I be? A mixture of remote audience laughter and clapping bursts and then clips out from Connor's telestream console. Geraldine grins, shrugs her shoulders, feigning a half embrace. Congratulations to you, Connor. Have you given any thought as to which reward you'd claim if you win tonight? Yes, Geraldine. I'm going to travel. If I won, I'd take the orbital escape vacation. What? Up there with all those unhealthy riches, Connor? The laughter and clapping came again. Geraldine looks skyward and presses her index finger against pursed lips. Oh, I'll be fine, Geraldine. I mean, I've had all my shots.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ben. So quite a lot in that one as well for people to sort of get hold of. All sorts of different angles and possibly some good stuff, some sort of almost utopian as well as some not so good stuff in there. Right, so now we'll move on to our third story from Jewel. So Jewel, her working life has been spent helping businesses build online technology, including short stints in the video games industry. But these days, she helps build tech products that involve automation and machine learning. And then her books are her creative response to the exponential growth of technological innovation in the era of climate change, with a bit of magic thrown in. So, Jewel, your story for this evening is called "Virtually Dead," which is a title. So, over to you.
Thank you. So, you know who I am, Mike asked. Yes, of course. I saw you every day for many years. I sorted your post, your Mr. Benz. Mike was sitting in Julian's concierge office, drinking a terrible cup of coffee and feeling grateful for it. So how did it happen, you being dead? Julian asked. I'm not dead, Mike said. But you are dead officially. Mike took this in, slightly stunned. After a while, he said, "It was my health plan. I had one of those watches you wear all the time and the little devices they inject you with, you know, microscopic machines that spread out in your body and measure everything in real time." Julian said, "I've heard of them, but I don't have health insurance, too expensive." Mike nodded thoughtfully, wanting to show appropriate empathy for what this implied, but really just overwhelmed by his own blind panic. He continued, "The machines transmit the data back to the servers in the cloud. The health insurance company owns everything. The company's tech people do some AI wizardry, analyze the data, write software to diagnose what is wrong. This software predicts outcomes. It gives health advice and automatically dispatches medicine." Julian said, "People like me don't get access to things like that, but I've seen the adverts." Mike continued, "The plan came with my job. As part of onboarding, a medic from the health insurance company came to my home, gave me an injection, handed me my watch, all boxed up nicely, and that was that. I forgot about it. I'd always been so fit. Besides, I'd never had time to stop and think about my health. It was way down my list of priorities after meeting quarterly and annual targets and trying to get my bonus. There had been some alerts on my watch and emails flagging that I should log into my dashboard. But it was near the end of the fiscal year. We were 5% off target and my team was working around the clock, and I didn't have time to look. Just after the year closed, my boss scheduled a meeting with me. I thought it was to congratulate me on the numbers because we'd made them after all. But when I met with him, he was with a person from HR. The HR person did all the talking. She said the health insurance company had been in touch and I was very ill. The company would put me on sick leave, effective immediately, to concentrate on my treatment and recovery. The next day, a medic showed me my dashboard and explained how they got the data and the results. He said the prognosis was not great, but there was hope if I began treatment immediately. I said that I felt fine, apart from being exhausted from the push towards the year end. He said that people often didn't realize they were sick until it was too late, and that was why their technology was so useful. A courier delivered the medicine. I took it, and then I felt unwell. At first, I couldn't cope with all the messages from colleagues wanting to know how I was. Clients sent me baskets of fruit. When the contact started to peter out, I wasn't too worried. The medic said I was responding to treatment, and there was reason to feel optimistic. In truth, I'd been burning the midnight oil and hadn't had a proper holiday in years. I spent time in my garden, going for walks, doing the exercise routine set for me by the health insurance company. Then I flatlined. I mean, my vitals in the health dashboard all went critical and then to zero. I rang the helpline. The person on the other end of the line was new. They promised to get someone else to ring me back. No one did. It took me several days and some persistence to get anyone to talk to me. "That's impossible," the health insurance executive I finally got through to said. "Well, it's not, because I'm talking to you and my dashboard says I'm dead." "If the dashboard says you're dead, you're dead. Is this a hoax?" I lost my temper and hung up. After that, everything spiraled out of control. The social media broadcasts from friends talking about their significant loss and their anger when I responded, saying that I was still alive, sending away the undertakers, trying to stop my bank from closing my accounts. Then the bailiffs came and said that I was squatting in my cousin's apartment. Of course, my cousin, who is my only living blood relative and the chief beneficiary of my will, was not going to admit to anyone who I was. My former boss, my so-called friends at work, none of them wanted anything to do with me. The health insurance company had been in touch. It was a legal matter. They were very sorry. Mike had been talking so long, he hadn't noticed Julian putting on his coat. Now he saw him, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Sorry, Mike, I have to go. You're welcome to stay here if you like. There's a sofa in the back room. It's not so bad. I've slept on it myself." Mike nodded. "You will help me, won't you, Julian?" "How can I help you?" "Tell people you know who I am." I did tell them. No one paid any attention. First, your cousin said she now owned your apartment and I should give her the key. When I wouldn't do what she wanted, I got all these official messages from legal people. And when I still wouldn't let her in, the manager of the building came. He's my boss, and he let her in himself. You see, I did try, but I nearly got fired, and I need this job. After Julian left for the night, Mike sat on the sofa and looked at his watch. Everything on the screen was red.
Thank you, Jill. That was brilliant. Sort of leaves me with a bit of a dread of cousins and of insurance companies. But, okay, what do we have next, Ben? I'm
going to turn to Christine again to pick a few points out of that, put a pin in a few things. Thanks, Jill. That was great. I really enjoyed that one.
I'm mostly going to just draw out one point that struck me listening to Jul's story, although, like, again, there is plenty of points that could be picked upon. And the point I wanted to pick out was that is a point in relation to personalized medicine, the personalization of healthcare. And the story suddenly made me realize that a very important issue with personalization of healthcare and personalization in general, all these personalized digital technologies, is that when things go wrong or when you are on the wrong end of the stick, personalization does not give you preferential treatment, but amounts to isolation. And it's not just that personalized healthcare or personalization in general treats people differently. It certainly does. But it is also that in the end, it is not even the same concept for everyone, depending on your relative social capital, really. So that was my, absolutely dystopic point about personalization for tonight.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, when you shared that with me in our offline chat, I was like, actually, yeah, it's really interesting. That literally can draw the line between the two. Thank you. So very briefly, I'm going to save Stephen from the ignominy and difficulty of introducing yourself as a writer to read the story that you've written by introducing him. Although I'm not sure how much of a bio I have. Oh, I do have a bio before I embarrass myself. So reading our last story tonight and co-hosting the series with me throughout the year will be Stephen Auram. And Stephen writes science fiction. He's a founding curator for the near future fiction at Virtual Futures, as well as a writer for Sci-Futures. His Nudge the Future collections, 2 published works, have been praised by publications as diverse as the Morning Star and the Financial Times. So to the capable hands for the last story, reading his story called Bits and Bacon, Stephen Auram.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so, and I'm a bit old school, so I've got it printed out rather than on the screen. So Bits and Bacon. His wife Helen had died a horrible death, and yet Yoshi, his plastic puppy, refused to stop showing videos of her across its forehead. Bacon, said Andy to this modern-day guard dog, which he loved and loathed in equal measure. No. Then add it to the shopping list. No. I have analysed the effect it could have on your health conditions, and it's a no. The sound of a key in the door distracted them. Look who I found, called the nurse. Andy seemed to remember this one was called Jane, or was it Jenny? Whoever it was, she wasn't the doctor he craved. He hadn't looked one of those in the eyes for years. Ellie stood behind her, making those tiny gesticulations that the local gang seemed to think passed for a greeting. Andy beckoned his granddaughter and the nurse to come in. This bloody fake dog won't order me any bacon, he said, as they took off their coats and settled in. He stared at Yoshi. Did he really need a robot to optimize his life, not to mention to act as the God-given gatekeeper to his fridge? Mind you, he'd seen how Helen had painfully deteriorated without access to this level of care, and he'd certainly do anything to avoid that creeping onslaught of disintegration. We've updated our terms and conditions, said the nurse. We need your permission to continue using Yoshi's data. What's changed? Does it matter? Said Ellie. The nurse glanced at the strip of tech pinned to her blouse. Mr. Tackle, the data pays for Yoshi and all the care it gives you. Not a bad deal if you ask me. Yes, I know. Go ahead. Upload at your convenience. She nodded, and after glancing at the chip on his wrist, which displayed his current aggregated state of health, she added, Good to see you're green today. She tilted her head towards Ellie. She's green too. Andy frowned, reminded that Helen had found it impossible to come off red. The nurse checked that Yoshi and the fridge were both up to date, and once she was satisfied that everything was in order, she left Andy and Ellie to it. Well, said Andy, as he felt his wrist chip taking its daily blood sample, what should we do today? Ellie was a good lass, really, even if she did run a bit wild at times. So when she suggested they go somewhere that she was sure her granddad would appreciate, Andy agreed. They set off on their walk, chatting away while improving his health score. Here we are, said Ellie as they reached the entrance to an alleyway. Where? One of ours, you'll see. Ellie led the way, stepping around the neat piles of recyclable food packaging, which, when scanned, would predict how the contents might affect your health. Each pre-packaged piece of food would have contained nanotech that registered its passage through the human, providing the health company with certainty on who was eating what. Stacked as they were, they looked inconsequential, but were an essential element of the health system, and their aggregated data was the reason Andy wasn't allowed to buy his bacon. A door with a red light came into view. A brothel? Of sorts, said Ellie, but a surprising one. Inside, the tall, elegant woman who was running the show led them past rooms packed full of people. Andy paused outside one of them where a young woman scanned a packet of crisps and passed the contents to the man opposite her. He grabbed a handful, crammed them in his mouth, and, leaving it wide open, he chewed loudly. He shoved the bowl in front of him to one side, paid her a little extra, and spat the masticated mess onto the dirty floor. She gathered it up, grimaced, and swallowed it in one gulp. My consumption workers take the hit after my clients have had the pleasure inside their mouths, said their guide. Interested? This way, said Ellie, guiding Andy away by the elbow. In the next room, a sumptuous spread of sizzling bacon and buttered bread was laid out on a long table. Empty packets were piled at one end, where a group of sickly individuals hung around with hopeful glints in their eyes and red chips on their wrists. Your treat, said Ellie. I don't understand, said Andy. Their host smiled. A bacon sandwich, absolutely top end, no tracking tech, expensive. Homegrown, black market? Ellie coughed. You must be kidding. They give you 10 years for that, and only 2 for robbing the rich. These are from the super rich homes in Mayfair. You know they avoid having to swallow tech by paying a sort of insurance premium on their food. It's a service the companies offer to certain postcodes. You purchase for your family and can then fool the system by allocating the packaging to whoever you want. All the family gets free healthcare, as long as they're green. Andy gazed at the luxurious spread. The woman gently pushed him forward. You pay us and you eat, but we pretend our workers ate it. Everyone wins. They look ill. She laughed. Comes with a job. They're excluded from healthcare because of their diet. Andy turned to Ellie. I can't afford this, he said. You can. Sell them a snapshot of your health data and you can afford 2 or 3. I already sold it to the nurse. Data isn't finite, you know. You can sell it more than once. But it'll be flawed if it doesn't include everything I've eaten. You think they care? Said Ellie. Come on, a cheeky bacon sandwich never hurt anyone. Just sell the data and enjoy the bacon. Andy leant across to the wrappers to see exactly what his data would buy, and his chip turned red. The woman pulled his arm back. You clumsy fool, you've scanned the package. You're matched to it now, and you'll have to take the hit. Grandad? It was your idea, said Andy, staring at his wrist, and a bloody stupid one too.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. Who wants to try and kick us off?
Can I start,
Please.
Ben, because I've got questions for Lucy and for Gus. I'm old enough to remember when the same was happening with bureaucracy and bits of paper. So where I was brought up in Poland, it was exactly like that, but there was not a computer inside. It was all exactly the same system, but based on bits of paper. You needed a paper for everything, preferably in triplicate, and really with a stamp. So whatever you wanted to do, it was days and days and days of queuing up to paper. So my question for Gus and the technology and Lucy, are we just migrating to the next stage of the big bureaucracy? And is it a sort of deep human desire to organize taxonomies and paperwork? We just happen to have very good tech to do it cheaply. What do you guys think?
So as I was listening to the story, I was wondering if doctors would become the new bank managers. I don't know if anyone like me remembers what it was like to actually have a bank manager that you had a relationship with. And the parallels seem quite similar, that disappeared from my life. And so as a result of that, I just ended up becoming a number. I ceased to be a person in the eyes of my bank and I became a number. And when I was listening to that story, I had a shiver up my spine that, is this the way it's going to go with GPs now?
And the line in my story I picked up from your report, Lucy, I think, where somebody was quoted as saying, I haven't looked a doctor in, or the doctors were saying, we want to look people in the eyes, but we don't get a chance.
They're reluctant bank managers, I think. The story that chilled down my spine was Jules's story, because I mean, obviously, as an academic and a researcher, I've watched this sort of rush to data, social media data, big data, cheap storage, and the kind of rush to use this as a frontier, both for research funding and hopefully for some good. But it's getting mired in a lot of issues, and I came to the conclusion after 15 years of researching tech that it was also, I want to say bloodless, but not in a kind of gushing kind of way, but it's so sort of soulless when you disaggregate the data from the person. And so when I was listening to Jules' story, actually what I was thinking about was people being stripped away from their identity. I mean, maybe not literally dying as in the story, but being stripped of their identity by bureaucracy, or by our asylum system, or by any which way that states or oppressors can take identity away from people. And that resonated with me a lot. I mean, I'm the child of a refugee from Berlin, and it just there are things about big data that absolutely do scare me, I have to say.
Is this an ageist thing, do you think, Lucy? I mean, I wrangle with this all the time, that as being the age that I am, the age that transitioned from no high tech to tech, I think I possibly see things differently than maybe my children do. And I wonder whether the same concerns are going to arise in their heads. I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that, but I suspect their perception is different than ours.
Well, I think even if you, acknowledge that I'm the same as you in that respect, I don't know what Christine would say, but whenever I see a rush to something, and maybe it's a rush, it's not a rush, it's been coming on for years, but now it looks like an absolute rush with the addition of the machine learning and the AI and the sort of lack of very informed public debate, that it's a transition period, which is why it's so ripe for science fiction. But it's also deeply, deeply uncomfortable at a sort of personal level.
And the thing is, I haven't always been an academic too. And my first training was in the 1980s in France as an engineer, where I specialized in computer science and in applied mathematics and theoretical mechanics. And I went on to work for a good decade in the tech industry. And I developed very early on a healthy suspicion of technology because I was working for corporations where suddenly, you were in a very healthy software editor where everybody was working happily and on products that seemed to make sense. And suddenly you were the subject of I remember the first time I was in a company that was subjected to a hostile takeover. I was 26. And this is something that just probably marked me for life as, even if a project in tech starts with the best intention possible, in 5 years after that, it may be an absolutely shit show. And you never know what you do, and in the hands of who what you do is going to fall. So that was an extremely valuable and steep learning curve at a very young age. And that was a long time ago. And I have a feeling, and also I worked very early on, before it took off, in the field of geographic information systems. And this was the happy marriage of cartography, very dumb cartography, and databases where you could start to add a lot more intelligence. I mean, a lot of data about all sorts of things. And you could tell this was going to be scary because it could add so much, very detailed information linked to localization. And it was the late 1980s, early 1990s, and you could tell this was not going to be for the best. Especially, as I said, when you were working in companies that were taken over by big capital. So, and I have a feeling I've sort of passed on some of that to my children who are 28 and 21, and both in tech, but very suspicious about the tech world and not into Fitbits and social media, neither of them. So quite happy I did a good job and a good impression there.
So we've got a question coming up in the Q&A here from Bornsteiner. And a lot of our action here, a lot of our stories, on the one hand, one of the characters in our stories that's common to all four of us is the data. And then you've got all the human actors that are being talked about. So that's where Born's question becomes interesting. It's how do we become gatekeepers of our own identities, an agency in the world of big data, where the insurance and user profiles are potent tools for our control? So as opposed to being a gatekeeper controlling our access to our fridge, which was fun, but it's that question there is a need for a role of managing our identity and managing our agency in the world of big data. There is a big, I think this might be a better question for Lucy than for anybody else here on what that architecture might actually look like. What would it actually look like to be an owner of that data? Do I have to carry around do I have to carry all my data myself and hand it out where I need to? Is there some kind of magic key in the cloud that we can share to others? How would that look, Lucy?
Well, you've got much more tech up your sleeve than I have, but there are various people working on personal data pods. An ex-colleague of mine has, left her research position. She's running a company and she's absolutely convinced this is the way to go. Tim Berners-Lee, architect of the web, has got his project to capture data in stores that mean that you can decide each time you want who to release your data to.
It might well be, I think, a personal responsibility, and one that we don't yet have an equivalent model for. Or maybe we do, and I'm just not seeing it. But we have to carry our wallet around for our cash. I remember when cash existed, and if I went out and I didn't have that $5 or that $10 on me, I would be coming home without the bus. And
cash is a wonderful example, Ben. I mean, as we move towards a cashless society, what you're actually doing is giving society the right to turn you off. Because if you do something, it's already happening in China, that because of the digital systems that exist out there, people's access to finance and money can be turned on and off. And I think what it is we're in a new country, and it's like you get off the plane and you don't know any of the customs or any of the rules. So what you basically do is you don't speak and keep yourself quiet. And that's the only solution I think that we have right now, is we either, they call it getting off the grid, right? So, if you don't want anyone to have your data, don't put your data there. There has to be a better solution to this. And I just think we don't understand the customs of the country in which we're in. But, to be part of society forces us to have a data presence. We don't have a choice. If we want to be a member of society, we have to have a data presence. And I don't see any society willing to give us the choice on what we do with that, whether we actually have to participate in that or not.
So maybe the question is, how do we reoccupy technology? Because at the moment we're being very passive. So I think all of the writers picked it up really strongly. I felt this sort of, big wing of black angel of passivity, which leads us to be the victims. But, we all techies, we can do open source, we can create, we can magic out things out of nothing. We just need to take more aggressive stand. I mean, Angus, you do a lot of that reoccupying of technology. Do you think we can step up on it and just, fight back?
So it becomes a question of ownership. As I said, by being a member of society, we've given up that ownership a long time ago. I think that as new things come online, Lucy, the work that you were talking about, that Berners-Lee is doing about being able to recapture your data and retake ownership of it. This gets back to the point I was talking about at the first, which is medical data, your face. Any aspect of you as an individual is now owned by, frankly, anyone who's willing to pay for it. And technologically, I don't think there's a way back from that. However, we can reduce the impact of it going forward, and unfortunately that would require some form of legislation, which is data in and of itself.
Angus, I think I agree with you when I come at this from the perspective of a software engineer, because there I'm looking at the tradition of storage and sensor, that once upon a time those sensors were actually quite expensive and not every signal could be recorded. And then if I could record a signal, I actually had to, cost it. How long is it going to be stored before I can get some value out of it? And as those two numbers have just reduced and reduced and reduced, nobody even asks the question in a business meeting anymore. They just store it and slew it, and it is spare money. And then
this gets back to Christine's point earlier, where she was talking about, the ubiquitousness of storage of data and availability of data is the real.
Right. But I'm wondering if health, particularly in the UK, and it was funny when we had the early preliminary meeting for this, that Lucy pointed out this, a lot of our stories are in the UK. And even though I can hear like the US healthcare model in part of Jules' story, we're definitely sitting here in the UK. And UK health data, that's a really interesting question, because we all own the NHS, right? It's a uniquely societally owned object, and even though we're selling off bits of its data to different firms and systems, I wonder if perhaps the NHS doesn't provide a fairly data illiterate society with a vehicle to ask those questions a bit better, a bit harder. So is there the mind in the NHS, Lucy, to hear that data story, or do they not even get it?
Well, the thing is, the NHS isn't one thing. It's made up of many, many, many parts. And the ecosystem of data is very, very complex. So quite apart from, what your GP can do with your data, you can consent to that GP letting them give the data to the local authority. I don't think we actually have got to the point where your individual data in detail can be bought and sold by anyone. I think it is bought and sold in an anonymized form, but frankly, I'd be none the wiser, because that's just what I'm told. I don't have any way of digging into it. There's no app for Find My Data, which would be really quite useful. So recently I did an interview with a chap who's the CEO of something called Genomics England, which is doing some absolutely fabulous work. And we also had somebody from the Independent Commissioner's Office, someone from NHSX, and they were all quite new. They weren't die-hard NHS people, they were all quite new into this world. And they said it had taken them 6 months. I'm sure they haven't got to the bottom of it, even to begin to understand how forget our own data, how information even flows around the system. So in a sense, I think the NHS might be a protector. Maybe we could make it into more of a community asset in this respect. I mean, there are a couple of reviews going on about data at the moment, and I think people, you know, it's not quite like, you know, machine learning and Facebook, where they say they can't turn it back, which I don't believe. I think we can probably regulate it better, and but I'm not entirely sure what which loudspeakers you need to speak through to start that discussion.
Right, well, there's our challenge. But I love the idea of a Find My Data app, and perhaps the NHS is a proving ground that it could first materialise. And Christine, I can't work out if you are waving there. Hi. I think you're not on mute.
It was. I had 2 points. It's just we always place the individual against the system, but my health data are not just my health data. I mean, especially my genetic data, for instance, they are also the genetic data of my children, of my family, of my parents. So the idea that I can control my health data and they are mine is actually a total fallacy. So, and this is another complication. So I think we are trying too much to think as individuals against a system and not enough as collectives. So this level of the collective for me is very important to try to think through and to actually raise attention to. Now, coming back to the idea of, and this is nothing, it's a totally different question, but Lucy was mentioning the fact that at least in the UK, NHS data, whenever they go out and, you know, health data or go somewhere, they are anonymized. I have an academic friend in the US who has done quite a bit of work. It was called of noir self-ethnography because, and that's in the US, but the point there was that she went through several rounds of IVF, and at some point, well, she lost she got pregnant and lost the baby, had a miscarriage very early on in the pregnancy. But from the very beginning, when she fell pregnant, and for years after she had actually lost the fetus, she got always marketing, targeted marketing towards which age the child, well, first the unborn baby, but then the child would have been, you know, that were extremely targeted to her own socio-demographic group. And that's what pushed her to actually investigate. And it led her to the doors of data brokers like Experian, who are not only massive data brokers, but also credit scorers, which is even more scarier, who made their job of, you know, collecting data sets from wherever, including anonymized data sets that come out of the health system. But because they managed to have so many data points along so many different variables, they also made their job to re-identify quite well, eventually, the data sets. And that's actually how she knows she was eventually re-identified and targeted by all these marketing companies, and has been for years now. So, and that's a very distressing story, and that's what pushed her to actually pursue this project. So yeah, so about anonymization, that's also the idea that you can anonymize a data set. You may be able to do it now, but it won't remain necessarily anonymized for long, or it won't be any more anonymized in 10 years. It's not anonymized once and for all. And that's something that also needs to be understood.
Christine, I think that the way that we get around that is your friend should take them to court because of the mental distress that's been caused for all of these years. And it's only when something like that happens and there's a potential litigation that steps to avoid such a dreadful situation would be taken. They're not afraid of offending your friend. It's not going to bother them at all. What is going to bother them is that if they leave themselves liable for cost. by acting in that way.
She could never pinpoint exactly where the leak had come from, because there were too many places it could have come from. And she could never exactly pinpoint which data broker made the leak. What she did was actually write an extremely beautiful book, and an extremely, noir self-ethnography about her own adventure through the system and her inquiry. But the inquiry conclusion was that, yeah, there are actually too many places where the leaks could have happened, and too many people and too many companies that could have been involved to actually put the blame on anyone.
Fascinating. Well, please, a plug for the book, or share a link into the chat for all those people curious. Please just pop that in the chat. I'd love to pursue the story along the lines of what is this collective then? What is the collective that we should represent as when we're trying to draw a barrier around data sets? And as we know, they are being sold en masse in groups. If me as a single data point on this system is futile, I cannot challenge how my data is going to be used, then what does that collective look like? I kind of feel like I want to return to the idea that the NHS is a good collective, partly because it is such a treasured thing in the UK. It really does feel like I think far more people are going to be able to make sense of what they think their health data is. However much you say, Lucy, it's multiple bits of data in multiple different places. I think they're going to be able to make much better sense of that than to think of their search history, or to have any kind of personal connection to, what was in their emails from the last month and a half, or their footfall traffic.
I mean, certainly we know in the UK that people trust the NHS more than they trust Serco, for example.
Right, that's a good point. And yet they're not up in arms when they suddenly see that, NHS data was sold to Plantier last month for $23 million worth of. Should we be? Yes. Should we have been bothered by Google getting that data 5 years ago? Who knows?
I think the problem is people don't understand who Palantir is and how bad they are. But I've got a question about, how we can raise the awareness, because, we've been fighting for the Bill of Digital Rights for a number of years. And it's a very difficult story because data is abstract, and a lot of people just don't quite get the connection between the abstract gathering and then what bad things happen to your life. So after listening to the stories, I just wanted to ask the experts, do you think we're on the right track looking at literature, storytelling, and bringing the whole risk to some more, touchable, emotional aspect to help people out? Maybe Gus.
So I saw, when you were talking about this, have you ever gone into the dark web? And there are services now that you can employ to find evidence and fingerprints of yourself in Tor and places where basically the data is illicitly traded. So you can actually subscribe now to a service. I can't remember the name of it, otherwise I'd give it all to you all. And the service basically will monitor in the dark web for details of you, fingerprints of you being transmitted around. And so I think it's at the individual level. I don't think it's at, it'd be nice to think that there'll be legislation, but I think we as new arrivals in the country of big data have to learn the language of, how do I protect myself? Do I need knuckle dusters, a gun, or a delete key, right? And if services can evolve to help support the individual take control of their own data presence, then I think that is the way that this would eventually get solved. Because if you legislate around it, then what will happen is that, well, you see what happens with the Bill of Rights, okay? The Bill of Rights was written, but you could drive a truck through it. It's effectively just words on a piece of paper now. Whereas if somebody owns what they view and what they feel about their data and how that's shared, then I think that's the way we crack it.
So do you think we should go the way the Bitcoin community has gone? So basically you own your key, and if you lose your key, that is it, your money gone, and there is no mercy and no hope. Do you think we should recover our personal responsibility to that level?
No, I think there's a real business out there for, now we're employing technology to solve a technology issue, which is fundamentally flawed, I think. But you know, the example I give of, you know, looking to see where your data is being traded illicitly, if we could do the same thing for legal transfer of our personal data, then I think now you're really onto something, because then the individual can take control of their own future.
So I guess a question for Lucy, there is Vaughan raised the question, do we need a analog of workers' union to collectively protect our data rights? What do you think?
Golly, what union would that be?
Data Victims Union.
I mean, you know, it's an old model, but if we're talking, you know, we're all talking about ownership of data, whether individually or collectively, and that is a kind of intellectual property model. I come at it, you know, I think I mentioned this in the sort of pre-meet we had. I came across this project in Boston where they did a trial of patients agreeing the notes that their doctors wrote down at the very, very source of the consultation. And whereas they found, okay, the consultation took a couple more minutes, people left satisfied, and they proved later on in the hospitals around Harvard and Boston, this is a long time ago, like 10 years ago, that these, once the patient notes were agreed, they were very happy to have an iPad at the end of their bed instead of all those bits of paper you see in films about the NHS with people's notes, so that anybody in an emergency could access all their records, because they believed they would get a better service by sharing their, you know, by sharing. But because they'd given consent and agreed, they felt a lot better. Now, I think that takes care of the origin story, but it doesn't take care of what happens later with, you know, these discussions about buying and selling and trading our data, whatever that means.
Well, isn't any legislation an outcome of collective view that we need to protect something? So I've been supporting something recently, which was a human rights bill for homeless, which Europe has now adopted and Labour Party has now adopted. And, you know, it started from nobody wanted to know, because why would homeless have any rights? They excused themselves from community by not paying taxes, by avoiding certain commitments. So there was a big discussion about it, but it feels right, and it is right, and eventually it's been accepted that it's right. So that bill is now been going through European legislation, and it started from, you know, a collective trying to protect itself. So bills are really the outcomes of collective trying to protect itself.
Well, I've got an example which is a bit different. So, I mean, if it is collective data, and we could maybe name it as a public asset, something like that, then I think it's protected in a certain way. And I'm thinking of this because I'm living in a hamlet at the moment while I shield for another few weeks. And there's a pub down the road. I mean, I'm very new to this place that everybody loved, but the people who rented it, they can't afford to keep it on. And so the parish council is hoping to turn it into a community asset to protect it from being stripped by some large brewery company. So the concept of public assets exists. I don't know. We should make a case maybe for certain forms of data.
That's an interesting one. So NHS data is a public asset because the NHS is a public institution, and yes, that might get us there.
Already, I mean, you know.
Well, though it's really interesting then, because you could start qualifying certain algorithmic behaviors as asset stripping, because as Stephen points out in his story, that data isn't just sold once. It doesn't just exist once as that building in your parish that, you know, may or may not get knocked down. Someone could clone your parish building and, you know, sell it in Vegas, or also sell it in Hong Kong, and also sell it elsewhere. So what does asset stripping look like? And every time I play with this, I find it very hard not to end up with a fairly complex piece of legislation that, much as we've outlawed certain weapons grade technologies, we have to outlaw certain data stripping technologies. We have to be able to qualify and quantify certain kinds of algorithms, how they behave, and actually lock some of them away. And I find that very difficult to get to terms with.
Sorry, Lucy, carry on.
I don't know if we have to do it to algorithms. We have to do it to people and companies. I mean,
well, people and companies already behave according to laws. We know that. We have laws for lots of things in people and companies.
No, but it didn't prevent, banks and financiers stripping assets and selling people down the river forever. I mean, the laws didn't change that. So, I mean, they change it now, but they didn't help then, if you see what I mean. So, yeah, sorry, needs more work.
Murder's illegal, right? But yet people still die and people still get away with murder. Okay, so again, society can only go so far in protecting the individual, and it's a combination of that. You set the standard. You say, ethically, this is where we are. This is what we believe. This is the direction we think we should go. The implementation of that, unfortunately, I think it still belongs to the individual. You can't abdicate yourself from that responsibility.
Is Gas fighting for the libertarian corner? Very good. Okay, we need to start wrapping up. So could we have each of the experts to take one takeaway from the stories? So maybe starting from Lucy. Yes,
the separation of data from the human, is really what we're talking about, or the representations of ourselves in data that become something that other people can manipulate in ways that we hadn't yet anticipated is very, very scary. I think interesting discussion too about what we do about it. Just to quickly throw in one book I was absolutely fascinated by a long time ago was called The Social Life of Information. And it tracked, bits of info as it went through kind of sociology and society. And I think, in a way, we need to do the same with bits of data now, do a kind of a bit of a tracking on it ourselves and see if we can come up with some solutions.
Great. Christina?
Very nice, Lucy. I think the stories really nailed it on the head from very different angles and perspectives. The main problems there, of alienation from our personal data, of how much we are willing to trade, or just not even giving a choice to trade between getting healthcare or better healthcare or poor healthcare in exchange for our data. So yeah, that was a really fantastic story and a great discussion. That was really cool. And by the way, I put the link to the book I was talking about somewhere up in the chat.
Great.
The link with maryebeling.net/book.
Gus, can we just have something from you for the...
Yes, very briefly. I'm more scared than ever of my insurance company now. I'm not entirely sure I ever want to speak to them again. But there's opportunity there, right? So we've talked about the dark side, which is where data is used. There is an opportunity for us as individuals to game the system, of course. We didn't investigate that, but that's for another day.
That's great. Well, I remains to just say thanks to everybody who participated. Both. So I was just silently thanking everybody for attending and contributing, both behind the scenes as we got the series established. And I've just placed in the chat now the link, which is the open call for Stories for Tales episode 2, The High Street. That'll be 8th of June, I think is our date for that, right? Open call starts now, so send your stories on this subject matter. We've got a great history in Cybersalon for talking about the High Street, Grimsby reports, and very many pieces that we've done before now. So open call closes at midnight, 2nd of May. Thank you, everybody. All the best.
Thank you.